Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in a minute or so. Good morning. Welcome to RWA Coffee and Conversation with Pablo Garza today. Thank you for attending. I am Jim Pfeiffer. I'm the Executive Director of the Regional Water Authority. The Regional Water Authority's mission is to serve and represent the interest of regional water providers and stakeholders for the purpose of improving water supply reliability, availability, quality, and affordability. The RWA was formed in 2001. It serves the interest of 22 water providers within our region, cities, counties, special districts, investor-owned utilities. Again, thank you for coming today. So I'm going to start with a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. Feel free to submit questions as we go using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will answer questions during the session as time allows. The live transcript is available by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. So I'm going to introduce the two people here today. I'm going to start with Ryan Ojakian. Ryan Ojakian is the Government Affairs Program Manager for the Regional Water Authority, leading the advocacy efforts of this organization. With over a decade of experience in the California Legislature, he has served as senior consultant for the Assembly, Water, Parks, and Wildlife Committee, as legislative director for Assemblymember Mark Levine, and as legislative aide for Senator Joe Simitian. Ryan holds a master's degree in economics from San Diego State University and a bachelor's in physiology and neuroscience from UC San Diego. And next we have Pablo Garza. Pablo Garza is the chief consultant for the State Assembly's Committee on Water, Parks, and Wildlife, where he oversees legislative analysis and advises on policy issues. With over 20 years working in and around the California Legislature, he previously served as an advocate for the Environmental Defense Fund and the Nature Conservancy, focusing on coalition building and public policy and conservation. He holds a bachelor's degree in English from UC Davis and a master's in Latin American Studies from UCLA. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Pablo.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate those introductions, and we're really excited to have Pablo here with us today. Looking forward to a fun and engaging conversation, or at least hopefully. I did want to give Pablo a second here for some opening remarks. I will start off with, I hope everybody grabbed their cup of coffee and are ready for, again, an engaging conversation over the next hour or so. And Pablo, please.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I like that coffee mug. Yeah, I don't think I have much to say. Thanks for the invitation and happy to be here. I think I'll give my caveat that, we're going to talk about a variety of issues here. And I think, my opinions are my own and not necessarily representative of the California State Assembly. So if I get in trouble, it's because it's my opinion, not the institution's opinion. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I think we can jump right in. A lot going on. So
yeah. I can tell it is likely that we won't get through all of the questions, so I think we'll just jump right in. I do want to start off with a little bit of your background, which I would like to start with the question, which is, how did you come to this line of work? And maybe what was the first job that you did in the legislature? I think we heard in your bio a little bit about your background, but maybe going back to maybe the first of those 20 years working in and around the Capitol.
Sure, yeah, thanks for I mean, I feel I've had a very meandering path to get to this point, but I also feel lucky. I love the job I have and I love the work I'm doing. So I feel really fortunate in that respect. Um, yeah, I would go back and say, I majored in English, thought I'd be a teacher, taught English in Mexico, loved Mexico, didn't particularly like teaching at the time, at least. But I got into archaeology and anthropology, so that's why I did the master's degree. And then I got into that program and thought, I don't really want to do that. And so I shifted to, my Latin American studies degree is interdisciplinary social science. So I focus more on political science and policy. It kind of got back in touch with that while I was in graduate school. And then I campaigned in the 2002 election down in the Coachella Valley, and was able to build a network and open doors to get a job in, early, March of 2003. I think I moved to Sacramento to start my first job with the then Assembly Member Lou Correa. He at the time represented Central Orange County. Now he represents Central Orange County in the United States Congress. But Lou gave me my first opportunity. I'm from Orange County. I knew him from back home, and I moved up there, and kind of the rest is history. I think I had an interest in natural resource environmental policy. That's why I got into public policy. When you start out as a legislative assistant, you got to do a little bit of everything and be a generalist. But over time, I was able to sort of learn more about natural resources policy. And then after about 5 years in the legislature, the Nature Conservancy was looking for a regional governmental relations position. And that's when I really felt things started to align for me, where I got to work in the subject area that was most interesting to me, and public policy. And
Cool.
then did that for about a dozen years. And then, this is a job I sort of had my eye on. And when my predecessor, Ryan, you're one of my predecessors, actually, right? when my successor to you, I guess, left, I threw my hat in the ring and it worked out.
That's awesome. And we're very lucky to have you in the position that you're in. I think your background is, obviously well suited to the current position that you're in. I do want to take this time. I really love that answer. I think that we got a great sense of sort of your path and your background. But I do want to ask a little bit about not just your work interests, which I think we got a good picture on, but some of your personal interests. So what are your interests outside of work? Interview question: what was the last book you read or best book you've read recently? And then, or other things like how do you spend your weekends? What is your idea of a perfect trip or vacation? I will highlight that we got a question from the audience about, have you taken any trips, given your background in Latin American studies, have you taken trips to Spanish speaking countries? So really anything in that vein to give us a sense of your interest areas.
Yeah, a lot of ground to cover there, but look, I like sports, especially basketball and baseball. So, and then I do like traveling, and I like getting outside. So I played basketball in high school. I still play, my body's telling me not to do it, but I'm still out there on the court, playing in rec leagues, and I love it. And I keep telling people they're gonna have to drag me off the court someday, if they want me to stop. But so that's something I do. And I'm a big fan of college basketball, and I'm a baseball fan. I'm sorry, most of you probably aren't Dodgers fans, but I grew up in Southern California, so I'm pretty happy about what happened last week with the Dodgers. And then, my wife converted me into a birder, and you'll note that I don't say a bird watcher because the proper term is birder. And we like to go out and hike and have binocs and look at birds. And I'm decent, I'm not great. I've been around like really good birders in the past. It's amazing how they identify birds, but I'm pretty good, I'm decent. But I have 2 kids. I got an almost 12-year-old and 6th grader, and a son, and an almost 9-year-old daughter, who's in 3rd grade. So we do a lot of stuff with them. We get them out there on hikes and take them on trips. My son's really into soccer, and I've been coaching his soccer team, and I really love doing that. I didn't play soccer, but I've learned a lot about it the last 4 seasons coaching their team. I think if I could get paid to coach youth sports, I'd probably do that for and I coach my daughter's basketball team, and we'll be doing, starting that up again this fall. So, a lot of, sports is a theme. Books. I major in English. I love literature. I love reading. That's another thing I like to do in my free time. Right now I'm working my way through Water and Power, which is kind of one of the classic novels on LA's efforts to take water from the Owens Valley, and about halfway through that. Really good, really well done. I try and rotate nonfiction and fiction, because nonfiction takes me longer to read. I'm trying to think, what's the last, anyway, I could go.
There's one book I've seen on your bookshelf, Ministry for the Future, and I think you hadn't necessarily started or gotten very far into it.
Thanks for that. Yeah. So, the last nonfiction book I read was Red Mars by Kim Stanley Young. And I have Green Mars sitting on my shelf. I haven't gotten to it yet. And that was really fascinating. But Ministry of the Future is one of his books I read a couple of years ago. And I love that it starts in a very dark place of climate change, but it ends in a very positive place about, there's a path to deal with this, right? But it's going to require sort of unprecedented collaboration anyway. But I like that he's very well informed, and he ends it on a positive note, and hopefully we can get to there at that point. But Red Mars was something I read over the summer. I think I finished up on vacation, and it's an older book, but it's great, and I will get through that trilogy, hopefully in the next year or so. But
cool.
And then Spanish-speaking countries, I'd say I did a year abroad in Madrid, Spain, when I was at Davis in the mid-1990s. I taught English in Mexico I was in Campeche, Mexico. It's on the Gulf side of the Yucatan Peninsula, and then I traveled all around Mexico. I've been to Ecuador, and my wife and I did a trip to Ecuador and went to the Galapagos, and that was amazing. Definitely want to take my kids on that in a couple of years. It was just one of those trips of a lifetime. I'm trying to think, and then I think that's kind of it. I really want to spend more time in South America at some point, like Chile and Peru. But it's on the list.
Awesome. Thanks for that great answer, Pablo. I will say a couple of things. So in the office that you're sitting in, 2 staffers before you was Diane Colburn, and she was a huge birder. Really huge birder. So there's something in the, I don't know, air in that office. And then on the birds, little known fact for some viewers, but the clock in the office there, every hour is a different bird song. So
that's right. I think that's a remnant of Diane's tenure here, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
I'm not even sure either, but I think that's right. And then on collaboration, I think that's, that is a really good segue into the next set of questions. I will say that youth sports is a good testing ground for things like collaboration. So I think that's also a nice segue. For those of you in the audience that aren't familiar, Water Parks and Wildlife Committee has jurisdiction over water supply and wildlife, hence the name. But that really translates into the jurisdiction of Natural Resources Agency, DWR, and Fish and Wildlife. I wanted to ask, in your view, what are the biggest challenges to water supply in the state, and what are the biggest challenges for wildlife? And then how much do those 2 issues overlap in your view?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. I think a lot of the folks on the phone or on the call probably know this well, and But climate change is really challenging our system in ways, unprecedented ways, right? And I think we've seen that in the last decade. Two of the most severe droughts on record have occurred, followed by two of the wettest years on record. So, kind of that whipsaw between, wet and dry has always been a fact of life in California water, but it's supercharged with climate change. And then I think, we're seeing this transition and kind of the form of precipitation, and kind of the modeling suggests that we'll probably get about the same amount of precipitation. And someone on the call might correct me on that, but it's going to come less as snow and more as rain and water. And kind of how do we manage that? Because we built a system around that's heavily reliant on a slower melting snowpack. And I think 2021 was a real wake up call in terms of the snowpack looked decent, but it didn't really translate into the runoff that we expected, or that we based on historical modeling. And it was like, oh my God. And so suddenly, what was a dry year became a very much more extreme dry year. So I think that's very much the challenge we're looking at in the next century. And I think just a little more on that, was it the Berkeley lab, or did that study on the low to no snow future, right, a few years back. And we hosted a briefing for the researchers, for legislative staff, kind of over Zoom like this, and it was really eye-opening, and kind of, it's just frightening to see. They're saying by mid-century we'll have these prolonged snow droughts, years without snow, and by end of century we might not have a snowpack. That's frightening, and that has huge implications for water supply. So it seems to be less about the amount of water and more about the form of which the water comes, and kind of how it comes, and when it comes. And that's going to be incredibly challenging for us to deal with. So I think that's the big one. And that has implications for affordability and quality and all sorts of things. And but I think that's what we're going to have to grapple with in the next 50 to 100 years. There's a second part to that question. Oh, and that is absolutely intertwined with species protection, right? We have a lot of our major, so many of our aquatic species are in severe decline or on the brink of extinction. So kind of how do we manage that? How do we ensure water supply reliability while also protecting the species? Has been kind of the challenge, particularly think of the Delta. We've been dealing with that for longer than I've been around. It seems like it really started waking up to that reality in the late 1970s, and we still haven't figured it out. So it's intertwined, and of course there's a lot of terrestrial species also in a state of decline. In bird, the decline of birds is alarming. I think water is a factor there, but it's also, the bigger factor is probably habitat loss, right? And we have this 30 by 30 goal, and kind of, are we going to achieve it by 2030? It's a lofty task, but I think it's worth doing. Anyhow, so these are big challenges we're facing, and the community gets to work on this stuff, so it's fun, I guess.
So I think that's a perfect lead into the next question, which I think we heard some hints at answers to this, which is, in your view, what is the primary solution or solutions to these challenges, right? The changing in form of precipitation. And I will underscore that I will not be in the crowd that pushes back on your description. Everything I've seen is the amount of precipitation is staying roughly the same if you look over sort of like a decade-long period. But it's the timing and the form that's really the big changes. That's what I've seen in the data. But what is, in your view, what is the solution to those challenges on the waterfront, and the solution on the wildlife question? I think you laid out some of what some of those solutions are, but just want to give you some space here to really sort of give us your thoughts on that.
there's a lot of solutions, I think. But I think, yeah, I'm really bullish on groundwater management. I think Sigma, I think we're on the right track with Sigma. I think, so far so good. You know, to manage the supply, I think groundwater recharge is going to be a huge part of the solution set, and kind of, scaling that up, doing more, taking water when we have a year like 2017 and even 2023, kind of capturing more of that flow when it's excess and everyone's needs are, mostly being met, including the environment. I think so. We got to be able to recharge more when it's wet, so we can kind of manage through the droughts, and especially if the snowpack is going to become less and less reliable over time. So I really think groundwater management, leaning into that is really important. And I mean, and I'm biased, I guess, because it kind of really got into in 2014 when I was at the Nature Conservancy. Is like I was working on water policy prior to that, but that's when I really got feel like I really began to cut my teeth in this space, in the water policy, and so I really feel invested in the success of Sigma, in seeing Sigma be successful and seeing it through to the end. I think let's see, 2040. I don't know if I'll be here in 2040, but I tell other people they can't retire, like the people at like Paul Gosselin, but I told him he's not allowed to retire before 2040. So I hope he listens to me. But so yeah, groundwater management, groundwater recharge are going to be a big part of it. Obviously we need to adapt our infrastructure. That's a to sort of, and and I'm not talking necessarily storage, but we're going to need to sort of upgrade and adapt our infrastructure, to be able to deal with this changed hydrologic reality, that we're seeing. And then hopefully we can, there's some sign, I don't know, we need to figure out some agreements on the Delta to kind of start doing something. I feel like the Bay Delta plan is just long overdue. And I think we need to adopt a standard and start trying to experiment and do something. I feel like it's just delay. And I think it's just sort of, I was involved in that process for about a year when I was at Environmental Defense Fund. I got kind of frustrated with the whole process, but I'm at a point where I feel like we need to do something, right? Because not doing something is a choice, and it's not improving the situation. I do think habitat restoration is going to be a huge part of the solution set for species. I recently did a tour of the Delta, just a couple of weeks ago in a boat, which was actually the first time I've done that, and it was great. And we saw the Lookout Slough project, which is really kind of, I think, inspiring. I think it's really exciting to see kind of a huge, I think it's around 3,000 acre tidal wetland restoration, and just starting out. I really want to go back in a year, 2 years, 3 years, and see how that looked. And like the more of that we can do, the better. In my opinion, it's going to be good for species. It's going to alleviate some of the conflict. And then, we obviously need to protect and manage terrestrial habitats for species as well to deal with those issues. So, I think groundwater recharge and management and habitat restoration. That's the short answer.
That's great. Really appreciate that answer. I'm gonna ask the question here that sort of all of these things tie together. So some of these things there will be some overlap, but this question is, what are the biggest barriers, right? So I guess you could, to advancing those solutions, I guess you could frame it maybe in a more positive way than I just did, which is like what are the best ways to advance those solutions? And I mean, I will say again, with sort of, I guess, foreshadowing into like a next question or one of the questions further down was, we did convene this meeting after the election to talk a little bit about what happened in the election. So I think, in this solutions, potentially maybe we can touch on Proposition 4, which is looking like it's going to pass. The last time I checked, it was at about 58%, so it's looking likely to pass. And you know, what does that mean potentially in that suite of solutions?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, biggest barrier. So I think, yeah, I'll say on groundwater recharge, I feel like I've been working on that on and off since, in some way, you know, whether it's legislative or, you know, otherwise, since the passage of Sigma. And I think, you know, there was a bill this past year, SB 1390, that didn't get across the finish line, but it was sort of modifying the governor's executive order on recharge that he did in 2023. And I think, you know, I'd say that, you know, information is a problem. Lack of information is a problem in the groundwater recharge space, because I think there's, you know, one of the things people end up sort of arguing or fighting about is kind of whose water is it, right? When we have a high flow event, like when do we really have excess water that someone can take and divert to recharge? And you know, in my view, that should just be an objective question, right? We should just know the answer. Like, take a stream, take the American River. We know these are all the water right holders. We know who's diverting, how much, when, kind of more in real time. You know, I don't think we have great real time information, and we just know. And we have it'd be nice if we had a more robust gauge system so we can really monitor conditions as they're unfolding. And we can just say, yeah, we could just tell. And then we have the diversion points, you know, set up and ready to go, and we just know we could take water, and it wouldn't be a fight, you know. And so I think that comes down to information, you know, just better information. And instead, we kind of come up with these, because we have imperfect information in that space, we come up with these sort of kind of generalized rules of thumb, right? And that was one of the fights over the Caballero bill this last year, is kind of the exporters felt like if there's excess, they want to make sure their rights, their needs were satisfied before people started diverting, and concerned that people were diverting and taking water away from them, or taking water away to meet water quality standards in the Delta. And again, I think that's a problem in my view, that we don't just know the answer, right? In a perfect world, we would have much better information, much more real-time information. We'd just be able to know. And I know the water board's taking steps, you know, with this sort of modernization, and we're getting better, but I think we need to do more, and we need more monitoring. So I think that's a problem if recharge is really going to be an important part of the solution set. And it could, you know, I think better information, at least I think it would reduce conflict. Hope, you know, maybe I'm wrong, being naive there, but I think it would help reduce conflict. Prop 4 you asked about. So I think that's, I fully expect that to pass. I'm not surprised it passed, and that's great. That gives us a shot in the arm in California to address a lot of challenges we're facing with climate. You know, and I think one of the, you know, I worked on that, and I think one of the hard things with that is it was trying to do a little bit of everything, right? You know, and I think that was maybe some frustration with the water sector, is that, you know, it's not just a water bond, and it's not like our flood need is, you know, 30 billion plus. And I think there's, I don't know, I should know this, but, you know, less than 4 billion, probably less than 2 billion, you know. Bob Reed would be mad at me for not knowing the number there, but like, I think, you know, it's not sufficient to address the need in flood, for example, but it's still substantial funding that will help. But, you know, we have big needs in wildfire, we have big needs in heat. And so, you know, we had to try and do as much as we could in each area, right? But, you know, Prop 4 is certainly going to help. It's insufficient to the ultimate, you know, I think you haven't really, you know, you asked this question when you work on a bond, like, what is the need? How much, what is the problem? What's the scope of the problem? What's the cost? And there's not really a good estimate for how much, at least that I have seen, for how much climate change will cost, right? You know, with the flood plan, Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, we have a dollar amount associated with that, with some other things we do. We know the climate assessment, I think it was the fourth climate assessment, said by mid-century, climate change will cost us, I think, like something like 50 billion a year. Largely that's due to heat impacts and kind of loss of human life as a result of that. That doesn't tell you how much it's going to cost to address that problem exactly, but it gives you a sense of how big the problem is. And it's $10 billion is, I think, the biggest bond the state's ever passed, the voters ever approved, but we're going to need more, before it's all said and done. And the state can't pay for everything, obviously. But Prop 4 will certainly give us a shot in the arm to help us take some positive steps forward. But I'm not going to pretend like it's sufficient to address all the problems it's taking on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's not a realistic expectation for the bond to fund all of the challenges. I think if that was the idea, then the bond would.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone said that was the
Yeah.
expectation, but
it's a seed money, right? The down payment to get started on the solutions that we know that are necessary. So a couple more questions about the election since we dipped our toe into that.
Yeah, I think that's probably most on people's minds.
First thing is, this may be early for this question, but how much do you think the election is changing the dynamics in the state legislature? There's a lot of new members. I think the number was around 30 in the assembly coming in, and just for everybody's context, right, there are 80 members, so you're talking about a real significant in the assembly in total. You're talking about a real significant change over there in terms of who's representing, who's comprised of those 80. So just some thoughts that you may have on that. How much do you think the election has changed the dynamics in the state legislature?
Yeah, I think probably a little too soon to tell on that. I think it will, it's sort of like two different paths forward, right? I think depending on who was going to win the election, and very, very much a contrast. But they're still counting votes, so I think we're still sort of dealing. The dust has still got a lot of settling to do before we kind of know. You probably saw the governor declared a special session this morning on kind of protecting California, issued an executive order, and I read that before the call, so that was news to me as well, and I think it looks like largely funding for the Department of Justice to kind of be prepared to combat, take legal action to protect kind of California laws and standards and whatnot. And this is kind of what we saw the first Trump administration, is sort of like pushback. What the governor's proclamation says that in the first Trump administration, the state filed 120 lawsuits. So I think we're going to see more of that. I recall, a lot of, it's a shift in focus, and again, like this is sort of my personal view, not, it's like we're just sort of beginning to dissect kind of what this all means. But you see a shift in focus to protecting California kind of thing and resisting. So it's very different than what it would have been under a Harris administration. So definitely we'll see a different dynamic next year. A lot of new members always introduces a different dynamic too, right? Kind of people learning and kind of just getting their feet wet. But the new members tend to come in, they want to do things, which is great. That kind of energy and desire to take on big problems. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But I think it will shift the focus that the legislature has next year to kind of pushing back against things that the federal government may want to do in California, right? And I also think, though, when we just talked about Prop 4, usually the great thing about the bonds is it helps leverage federal funding, right? And I think there's a real concern that it's going to be harder for a state like California to get federal funding with the Republicans in control of all looks, well, we'll see what happens in the House, right? But I think it's going to be, you know, look, I'll say, you know, look, I'm a Democrat. I'm dismayed, and that's an understatement, right? But by the outcome here, one thing I'll say about Trump is he is as advertised, right? He doesn't. He is what he says he is, and so some people think that's great, other people not so great. I'm not really looking to get into debate about that, but he is as advertised, and so the things he said he's going to do on the campaign trail, I take very seriously. I think he means it. Now, will he effectively pull it off? TBD, right? But he tried to act on a lot of his campaign promises the last time around, starting with the Muslim travel ban and building the wall and those sorts of things, which aren't about water, obviously. But I fully expect he's going to try and act on these things. And he doesn't like California. So I think he will, he's not going to be interested, obviously Congress passes, appropriates the money, but I think there's a very real concern that it will be harder for California to get federal dollars for projects. I think that's very real. So it's sort of like it could be problematic for Prop 4 and kind of how, will we be able to leverage the federal dollars we would have historically leveraged with state matching funds? That's sort of TBD.
So I think, and this was a audience question, and I think you started touching on these, but maybe just a little bit more on this. What are the biggest vulnerabilities sort of in the natural resources area with the change in the federal administration?
Yeah, well, I think the two big water issues that I think we'll see how this shakes out, but it's the Delta and it's the Colorado River, right? And I think in the Delta, I remember February 2020, the Trump administration first go around issued new biological opinions to manage, some people liked that, some people didn't. The state promptly sued the federal government. NGOs sued the federal government. And we've just sort of finally, more than 4 years later, begun. It looks like we've kind of unraveled all that mess, right? And I'm told the state water contractors, received the incidental take permit just on Monday for all that, and so it looks like the dust is finally settling from more than 4 years ago. This is a complicated issue, and so what's the incoming Trump administration going to do with that? Are they going to accept something that the Biden administration did, right? Environmental groups think what the agreement that's being reached or come to is kind of Trump light, right? I don't know the details. I haven't been really engaged in that the past 4 years, but I think Trump campaigned on more water for the San Joaquin Valley. So like I said, as advertised. So I think he will, and his officials will seek to find way, do they think this agreement that's being reached sufficient water for the San Joaquin Valley? And maybe they don't. And so do they take us back and kind of throw a major wrench in the whole thing, right? I think that's a very real concern. And then the second on the Colorado River, the federal government's in a process to, update, renegotiate the interim guidelines, right? And those expire in 2026. I'm not in that process to sort of read about it, right? But it appears that the basin states are working fairly well together. And I think the Biden administration kind of put down a marker. We need to cut 2 million acre feet on the river. And how are we going to do that, early on in the administration? So we have this long process that's complicated, very technical. What do they do with that? Do they seek to, and do they use that process to, enact retribution on blue states like Colorado and California? I think it's absolutely a real possibility and probably even a likelihood that they will do that. And so I think those are the two kind of big federal issues that could be concerning. And I think, you know, if California can comes to a place where it gets less Colorado River water, it's less reliable, that has absolutely implication. It's connected to the Delta, right? Because in Southern California, it turns north, thinks they need more water. So these are very real issues, and I think it's gonna we could see some major monkey wrenches thrown into both of those processes on the Delta and Bay Delta and the Colorado River. And then the final thing I'd say, well, maybe probably not the final thing, because I'll be talking about this a lot, right? There's a lot to say, but you know, an overarching issue that I think is problematic for both of these processes and many other things is kind of this war on the administrative state, right? The kind of taking on the bureaucracy, you know, eliminating civil service protections, and kind of going after people who are deemed not sufficiently loyal to Trump, right? You know, and he said he's going to do that as advertised. I fully expect them to go after that. And so what does it mean for the people? These are complex issues that people, you know, staff at these agencies, at the Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Reclamation, Army Corps of Engineers have been working on for years. Do they get shown the door? And how many of them walk on their own because they're just like, this is too stressful, I don't want to deal with this. And you could forgive them for doing that when they're kind of deemed to be enemies of the public because they're part of the deep state or whatever. That's very, you know, I don't know. So I think some people walk out the door because you saw that the first time around. I think you'll see some of that this time. And then how many are just pushed out because they don't? And then if you have new people come in working on interim guidelines on the Colorado River all of a sudden, and they don't have the history, that kind of really, at a minimum, it results in delays, and it probably has worse implications than just that. So, yeah, I don't mean to be so doom and gloom, and like I think there's probably people out there who think I'm you know, being hyperbolic, but that's how I see it, and that, you know, that's my personal opinion, not an official opinion. But you know, so I think it's very concerning on the waterfront, kind of these two big issues and kind of these overarching themes. You know, I think we'll see. You know, it's going to be interesting times, as I say.
Yeah, appreciate that answer. One thing, right, just like how the interconnectedness, one thing that I've heard said is that water is the thing that makes California one state, right? Like otherwise, like, right, it's like the Coachella Valley and Crescent City, Del Norte County, like they don't look or feel like the same place or even like country in some respects. Right, but they are very much still connected by how the water system in the state of California works. So just that tidbit. Switching gears a little bit, but I think it's relevant to the last question and answer is, what do you think the best way for water agencies to advance their interest is in the legislature? And sort of related question, do you have any advice for water agencies who want to work with NGOs on water issues? Again, I think they're different questions, but definitely related questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the engaging with the state legislature, it's kind of my canned response, perhaps. But I mean, I always encourage people to come and talk to us, right? I think, you know, sometimes it probably seems like, you know, I'm talking to junior staff, or, you know, am I really, you know, penetrating? But it's really important to show up and kind of engage with staff and legislators. So I think, you know, definitely you should have a relationship with the legislators that represent the region that you serve. You know, if you're a water agency, you should have, you know, and be on a first name, you know, your government relations folks should be on a first name basis with those offices, and hopefully have, you know, good relationship with the actual legislator themselves. And it's important to show up. And I think water is complicated, right? And I think, you know, one of the other dynamics, I think we're seeing it across society, but this sort of transition of kind of as the baby boomers are retiring, and you know, and like younger, and I feel like I'm young, but I guess I'm not, but like people like me are stepping into roles. It's like, I think we've lost some institutional knowledge, and so it's like constant education, right? And I think I'm really excited when I hear, younger staff express an interest in water policy, because it takes time to learn, right? There's a lot of history, it's complex. So I think the water agency, you have a lot of expertise and knowledge that it can inform the policymakers, and I think it's really important you show up. We lost two, Dennis O'Connor retired a couple of years ago, and Al Brown left last year. They had a lot of experience between them on water policy, and were involved in a lot of the big water, the flood legislation, and I think 2007, the Delta Reform Act in 2009, and Sigma in 2014, and the water making conservation a way of life in 2018. Those guys were involved in all those things. So
Okay.
so I think and I'm coming. I don't want to sell myself short, but it's like we need your help to sort of explain and understand the history and kind of the what this all means. And then I think it's also really important for people in the real world to inform policymaking and policy decisions. And that, again, that's why you need to show up and engage with us, because you can be in a room making a decision and not, but like thinking through kind of what does this mean in the real world. I'm a firm believer that's really important. I seek that out personally. But you get pressed for time, and so I think it's important to kind of stay engaged with the legislature and agency. So that's kind of amorphous, I guess, but it's good for you, Ryan. I'm not trying to just pump you up, but but it's really important, to kind of share your knowledge and perspective and expertise with policymakers. And then, I don't know, with NGOs, I think there's a lot of collaboration happening. I mean, I think, Regional Water Authority's done a good job. There's some issues like the Delta is very difficult because there's just so much conflict over many decades. I was at Environmental Defense Fund when we effectively walked out the door on the Bay Delta Plan update, and I don't think the NGOs are really engaged in that anymore. But I think there's other areas. I know there's really good collaboration on habitat restoration. I encourage that, keep finding those partners, and I think it's just a matter of trying to find something to work on together, and kind of being willing to set aside areas of disagreement, perhaps, and work on something positive. In my days at the Nature Conservancy, I used to represent the Nature Conservancy on the California Rangeland Conservation Coalition, right? And sit down with a bunch of ranchers, and it was more about land protection and oak woodland protection. But it was sort of understood, like, we're going to agree. There's probably like 80% of things we disagree on. We're going to focus on the 10 to 20% we agree on, and that was built in to the whole premise of that organization, which I think still exists. So I think it's kind of like you have to set some things aside in order to collaborate and do something positive in the world, I think. And it's worth the effort, and then hopefully it builds relationships that allow you to maybe take on some of those more difficult issues that you disagree on, right? And so I think again, I feel like there's some good collaboration that I'm aware of, and I think we're going to need to do more of that. It's really going to be important to the challenges we're facing as a state, not just like because of the election results, but just kind of climate change. It's like that book, Ryan, ministry, kind of that collaboration is the key, and sort of, I believe that, I can be jaded and cynical, but I'm still an optimist, and I still, I ain't done yet. I'm not about to retire, so I got some good years left in me, and I'm going to keep working on this stuff.
Well, appreciate that answer. And my mind did go to similar to your answer. I think it's okay to be jaded, but still be an optimist. And so, like, in my mind, climate change presents a huge challenge, but the solution sets, right, they're yet to be determined, and there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration in that space, right? If you come to those things with an open mind and not necessarily think about the way things were done in the past, but what does the future look like? I think I'm going to ask my last of my pre-prepared questions, and then we'll get into a little bit. We've touched on some of the audience questions, and I think this may be a very short answer, and that would be fine. But the question is a little bit of an open-ended one. So in addition to everything that we're doing today, what else do you think maybe water agencies should be doing in engagement in the legislature? This is your opportunity to tell us all the things that we've done wrong, or an opportunity to tell us all the things that we've done right and should continue to do.
Oh man. Well, can you figure out Proposition 218 reform? That would be good. That would be a start. I don't even work on that, but I mean, I think, you know, anyway, I think that, I guess I'm being a little facetious, but you know, that would help. Geez, I don't know. I think, yeah, I don't really have a good answer. I don't think that it's sort of like, I think I engage with a lot of different water agencies. I feel, you know, I value your input, and I value the expertise that exists out there, and I think that helps. And I think, so, you know, doors open, and you know, I think, I don't know, keep showing up, keep telling me what you think, or tell policymakers what you think. We need the input.
Great. Stay engaged. Let me go to, and you touched on this in one of your answers before, but one of the questions that we got from participants here, which is given, and you touched on this on when you said we need better information.
Yeah.
Given the critical importance of reliable data for future water resource planning, why is there such limited investment in upgrading essential water data systems, and what can we do to address that?
Yeah, well, yeah. You can't. Well, it's like the adage. I don't know who said it. It wasn't Mark Twain, but it's like you can't manage what you don't measure, right? You know. So I think a lot of it. It seems to me a lot of the conflict we have over water is over whose water is it, right? And I think if we have improved understanding of kind of what's coming to us in the system through precipitation and kind of who's using what, I think it makes it easy. We can manage it better, more efficiently, and I think we can reduce conflict. So I think it's a really important, and that's stream gauges, that's ways to measure, you know, consumptive use. Not everyone loves that, but you know, I think it's hard. Really, you're not going to win if you're arguing that we don't want you to know what we're doing, right? You know, if that's your perspective, I'm sorry. You know, like this is water is an essential resource to everyone. It's a public resource. So the state should know who's using what where. And this is, again, my personal opinion, I guess, but I'm not the only one who holds it. Like, so, but, it takes resources, to kind of put the gauges in place and keep them running and to allow us for the monitoring we need to do. Certainly, metering can be controversial. It can be very expensive. So, I'm encouraged by, like my colleagues at EDF we're working on OpenET with NASA and like tools like that can help reduce the cost. So we have a really better picture of like who's using what where. I think that will help. But it's really important, and I think it's kind of, we have to come into the 21st century where it's kind of a tech center state. Like, we need to apply that to our water system, in my view. And I think it also comes down to it applies to residential and urban use too, right? We need to have better kind of understanding of who's using what where, and that's because we kind of have we don't really manufacture water. I mean, I guess you could say recycling and desal are sort of a version of that, but it's kind of, we get what we get, you know, it's finite. And in some years it's a lot, other years it's not so much. And so we need to really be judicious on how we manage it. And that all starts, the first step in that is, you know, really a full picture of kind of what's the demand and what's the use out there. And I don't think we're not there.
So I think we got time for one last question and then we'll close. And I'm gonna go to one of the questions that we got from the audience, and this comes from apparently one of your former colleagues. But the question is, what role can the state of California play in helping to make the Army Corps consider and emphasize multiple co-benefits of their crucially important projects? So I'm thinking like flood, Furomar, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, I'm thinking of Hamilton City, the flood, right, which I worked on when I was at the Nature Conservancy, and like the Army Corps is actually pretty receptive to, you know, that was a kind of a, you know, setback levy, had some habitat restoration, improved flood protection, and you know, I think before I got to Nature Conservancy, well, no, actually, that's not right. There was something in WRDA in the 2000s to give them authority to do that. You know, I think, you know, maybe that's not the best answer, but it's like you gotta lean on them, right, and kind of keep going to them to kind of explain the project. And they got there, you know, on Hamilton City and other projects. So they come around and they get there, but it takes. You know, they're really smart people there, right? So they get it, but it's like it takes a lot of engagement and kind of packaging a nice project that, you know, works for them, you know, that works. So, you know, but you know, as I remember, I was at a Floodmar forum, and there was a, you know, I think he's now retired, but was it Tim Washburn, who I always loved. He's very provocative, but he said there's no such thing as a multiple benefit project. And his point was more, he was trying to be provocative, I think, to sort of say the funding doesn't align with multiple benefit, right? If the funding is, there's a flood protection funding source, there's a habitat, and you got to sort of, you as a project proponent have to sort of piece that together. And so maybe that's a policy change that needs to happen to allow more flexibility with the funding. I don't know, it's sort of a federal level thing, but that could certainly help the Corps. But, you know, I think kind of the innovation with Hamilton City was like, that's right, I'm jogging my memories, like there was a provision in WRDA that allowed them to kind of use a different cost benefit, you know, what they use their NED analysis, National Economic Development. That was the old way of looking at a flood control project. It was really about what's the value of what we're protecting and how much does the project cost. And like this innovation allowed them to look at habitat restoration as a benefit and price that and include that in the. So I think we could do some policy changes that allow that on a bigger scale, perhaps, but it also takes putting together a good project. I mean, it's a lot of work for the project component ultimately, and unfortunately, but I think maybe if we can get some policy changes in place, we could also make that easier. So it's not the responsibility of a well-intentioned agency just to do all the work, because that's a lot to ask.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's so as I said at the top, we weren't going to be able to cover all ground. I think that was like almost like a cliffhanger, right? Like, what is the policy question to allow for project proponents to better access government assistance for advancing their projects. We're just about out of time here, so I do want to like say thank you very much, Pablo, for spending an hour of your time with us. It was very informative. Really appreciate again your candidness and answers on a host of issues. We ran again through a lot of different subject areas. I do want to give you you know, the opportunity here to close us out with any final thoughts. We have, I don't know, a matter of seconds.
No, thank you again. This was fun. I enjoy it. Please, I don't know, you can find my information, my email and information. If you don't have it, please reach out. If I said something that offended you, like, and you want to talk about it, let's do it. Like, or if you agree with something, let's talk about it. Anyway, but I'm available and happy to talk to anyone. But thanks again. This was fun, and
Great.
we'll see you
Thank
soon.
you, Pablo. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Take care.
We'll see you later.